I'm Rodger Citron. I'm a professor of law at Touro University, Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center. This is a Touro Law Review Podcast. And today, I believe he's our first repeat guest on the podcast. And that's not his only accomplishment. Our guest today is Thane Rosenbaum. He is a novelist, he is an essayist, he is a law professor, and he is the Distinguished University Professor at Touro University. So, Thane, I feel a little bit like Oprah. Welcome back.
Rodger, shall I say, I serve at the pleasure of Rodger Citron.
Well, perhaps for the next hour, but after that, it's an open question.
You mean it's only the hour? Because I've been operating under a different principle, Rodger.
Well, I never knew that. I'm glad I do
you
now.
Should know.
And last time you were here a little more than a year ago, and we talked about the Supreme Court term that had just ended back in the summer of 2022. Here, we turn to another branch of government, if you will. Those of us who are separation of powers or administrative law fans, of course, we turn to the operation of the executive branch. We're talking about a number of indictments of the former president, Donald Trump. You recently wrote about the four indictments. I believe was it in the Jewish Journal, Indictment Meltdown?
Yes.
Yes. And so really, this conversation today will get to the heart of a fundamental question, not only for law students and lawyers, but for all of us as citizens on the relationship between law and politics. And just as a starting point, I wonder if you could orient us to the four cases. And I wonder if at first we could try to just talk about them purely, if you will, from a legal perspective. And then we can sort of, circle back and talk about the broader questions raised. With that introduction, could you take it from here?
Ready to roll, Rodger. I was listening to you carefully, and I thought, it's not just law and politics. It's also law and morality, because I think that it's being confused, right? I can sit here as a law professor and legal analyst and say to you, bad man, grossly negligent man, undisciplined, impulsive, reckless. I can give you lots of great adjectives to describe former President Trump. The question is he a criminal? And that, I think, is confusing for a lot of people, because if I just said all those things about him, surely he must be a criminal. And I think that that's where there's a conflation that I find a little distressing. Why? Well, I'll get to this more specifically, but, the statutes that are being applied to him are very imaginatively and creatively being read, in my judgment, and dangerously so. We seem to have ignored certain statutes that we always thought, especially liberals and progressives, we thought was toxic, like the Espionage Act, and how dangerous for, 100 years more. People like the ACLU thought this is a terrible law and something should be done about it. But when it came to applying it to Donald Trump, when he didn't actually destroy, disseminate the documents, he didn't share it with any foreign entity or have any connection to any foreign entity. And there's something called the Presidential Records Act that no one wants to talk about unless you're really honest. But if you go to the New York Times, if you go to MSNBC, you'll never hear the words Presidential Records Act, which means that, and now I guess we're going to the documents case. There's a good example. This is the one where he took with him classified and unclassified documents. He was in negotiations with the National Archives to return it. He returned some, not all. He then either deliberately lied, or he just didn't know, or he was just playing three-card Monte with documents for no reason at all. And in the end, they raided his house in Mar-a-Lago and discovered more documents And there we go. Now we have an indictment called the Mar-a-Lago case, the documents case. The heart of it, 32 of the 39 counts, are the Espionage Act, that he had unlawfully retained, removed documents, and mishandled them. Okay. And therefore in violation of the Espionage Act. We say, well, how does the Espionage Act normally act? How does it normally work? And we go, well, it's like the Rosenbergs. It's Julian Assange. It's Edward Snowden. It's Chelsea Manning. It's Jonathan Pollard. It's people who had no business holding on to classified material and then disseminating it publicly or to foreign enemies. That's how it's been applied, except for today. Today, it's something else. Now, it's being applied against a former president who actually not only did not engage in destruction, dissemination, or dealings with foreign entities, but he just retained it in his house. And there's an act called the Presidential Records Act, which is essentially a civil act. As far as I could tell, there's no enforcement provisions, nothing criminal about it, where it says, Mr. President, and it's a rarely recent act, I think it's from the 1980s, Mr. President or Mrs. President, we understand that you have a possessory interest in documents created during your presidency. George Washington took stuff home. People took stuff home. We want you to be we want to remind you that the American people really own the documents and that we need to negotiate with you its return and perhaps grant you like a license to basically keep stuff in your house if you want it. We can discuss it. It's open to discussion. They raided the president's house. They raided the house as if he was a Colombian drug lord without recognition that even though he may have not been fully honest about how many he still had, he's still the former president of the United States and he still had a possessory interest in the documents. He's unlike any other person who had ever been prosecuted for documents. Now, no one's talking about that. And if you're a law student, you should be outraged because I thought we were supposed to be worried about people smashing your door down. Isn't that what the Fourth Amendment was about? King George III smashing your door down and going through your personal effects, right? Isn't that what we were worried about? So I just think that there's an example. So now 32 of the 39 counts in the Mar-a-Lago case are espionage acts. That means almost all of it is. And the rest is obstruction of justice. And more recently, the destruction of evidence, like the video surveillance cameras. Now, if they had brought an action on the 7 charges of obstruction of justice and the destruction of video cameras, we wouldn't be having this conversation, or that conversation would have been over. Because I would have said, well, that's an appropriate action. But the Espionage Act, everyone knows that act, every law professor in America, where are you people? Why aren't law professors smashing their heads against the wall saying, oh, wait a minute, this is a very good opportunity to take a look at the Espionage Act because it's a really awful law that has always been awful. It ruined lives. People committed suicide, based on very flimsy evidence that establishes that you're an enemy of the state. And what Trump did is what a child would do, what a frat boy would do, what an impulsive, undisciplined, reckless human being would do. But that's not necessarily criminal. And it doesn't make him an enemy of the state. But in fact, what we saw here in each instance, Roger, was overcharging, sensationalizing what was there, and turning it into something that it's not. And so that's the espionage case, the documents case. The New York State Falsification of Records Act, well, it was essentially hush money payments to keep someone quiet, confidentiality agreements, very common. I don't want my wife to know, and I don't want the public to know. I'm willing to give you some money to shut up. It's a contract. you breached the contract by letting the world know that I did this. If anything, I should be suing you. We had a contract. I gave you some money. Instead, it's, well, you paid your lawyer monthly as if it was a legal fee, and he is the one that paid off the porn star. And so therefore, you falsified business records. By the way, I don't even know a situation where I would be paying off a porn star to shut her mouth about an affair, and I would put in the ledger, paid off a porn star to shut up. It's just ridiculous. Of course I wouldn't. Of course I would recharacterize that as something else. What would be the point of shutting her up if my records had to say exactly what it was? I slept with porn star and I gave her some money. It's utterly ridiculous. And get this, talk about, they turned what is a misdemeanor, the falsification of business records, into a felony. How'd they do that? Well, they said, well, by paying off your lawyer legal fees to prevent the porn star from speaking, you in effect made a campaign contribution to your campaign. You gave a check to your campaign to keep your campaign going because you didn't want to be embarrassed. In fact, it's my money. It's not someone else contributing to me. It's Trump's money. And somehow paying off the porn star became a felony. So that's let's call that the hush money falsification of business records. That's case number 2.
Yes.
Case number 3 is the one in Washington, D.C. that was supposed to be called the January 6th case. Why? Because the January 6th Select Committee conducted investigations. On prime time, they spent a lot of money producing a very horrifically graphic video showing the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and some others rampaging through the Capitol. And that was essentially the core message of that case, the destruction of the Capitol. And it was always called the January 6th case. The October 6th committee gave those findings that were investigated to the Justice Department and said, this is called a referral. We refer to you all of our records that we have kept, all the interviews, everybody that we testified before us, and the videos. Don't forget the videos, very graphic. And we would like you to bring a January 6th case that is essentially an incitement to lawlessness, violence, and a seditious conspiracy case, because we are bringing cases against the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers for seditious conspiracy. And because we're Democrats and we hate Donald Trump, if we can prosecute him for seditious conspiracy, then under the 14th Amendment, he would be prohibited from running for office because he engaged in insurrection. Well, Roger, guess what? When the Justice Department got a hold of the case and they took a look at it for a while, they dropped the incitement to violence and they dropped seditious conspiracy. And they created instead different elements that are not treasonous or insurrectionist. And they only prosecuted one guy, the president, and had some, I think, 6 unnamed co-conspirators. And then they charged him for something called defrauding the American people, unlawfully trying to overturn the election, preventing people from exercising their right, a lawful right, and the obstruction of a federal meeting in progress. Those are, in some ways, those are interesting legal theories. And by the way, would make a great law school exam, those 4 charges, but they're not on the nose of what happened here. They're just not. The obstruction of a federal meeting usually comes up with corporate malfeasance when you intimidate or threaten witnesses. This one isn't really that. The overturning the election, okay. It's now no longer seditious conspiracy. They say it's a conspiracy. Well, if it's a criminal conspiracy in America, you have to show evidence that all the conspirators knew they were involved in the same plot. And there's no actual direct evidence between the president and all of the unnamed co-conspirators and all the other people that are conspirators that weren't even unnamed. They're just unindicted and unnamed altogether. The defrauding of the American people, usually defraud in that case is financial crimes, right? That's how it's normally interpreted. So fraud is now being called election interference, overturning the election, lying to the American people. Well, I don't know. He has a First Amendment right to engage in political advocacy, and he seemed to believe that he won the election, and we want our people to be able to speak. The Supreme Court precedent is pretty seriously is very permissive on stuff you can say in America. We're the most permissive democracy in Western hemisphere. We're nuts about the First Amendment, except when it comes to Donald Trump. When it comes to Donald Trump, we're very restrictive. But when it comes to everyone else, for instance, Stacey Abrams, she thought she won. She's not in jail. Hillary Clinton thought it was an illegitimate election. She's not in jail. Barbara Boxer had a problem with an election. She's not in jail. They had a First Amendment right to object to the election results. He doesn't. Why? He's a bad man. He's a bad man. So that's the third case. The fourth case looks like the third case, but it's in state court, and it's crazier. It's even nuttier in my mind. Why? Well, here we have 19 defendants instead of one, and we have RICO charges, which are normally applied to organized crime, which invokes a criminalized element of violence usually, and finance, not overturning election. This would be the first time RICO was used for overturning election, because we know it as something that originates with organized crime. So here we are with something that is essentially an overturning the election case, but it's being framed as a racketeering case. And so that's essentially, and so we have 160 overt predicate acts that establish racketeering, all towards a common goal. Because they didn't have seditious conspiracy would have required all the co-defendants to be in cahoots with each other. With RICO, it's a more expansive law, and you don't have to be in cahoots. You and I don't have to know each other. We can be in a different state, and we could be doing nasty things all towards the same goal, and we are now co-defendants, co-conspirators. So those are the four cases. Guess what? There are two more. There was the defamation case, which was a civil case. That was most interesting. Why? Well, because the jury found that he didn't rape her, but he committed sexual assault. But what she claims was the defamation is he denied raping her. So how can she win the defamation case, civil case, if the charge is rape and the jury didn't find rape? You know why you can do it? Because he's a bad man. He's a bad man. Law professors would be shouting at the moon if this wasn't a bad man. They'd be go, whoa, that's a little twist. That's a little creepy. You kind of have to find rape in order to establish the defamation, because that is purportedly what she lied about. And we have one more case down the pipe. Next month or so, the New York Attorney General will be bringing a civil case against Trump and his children for artificially inflating the value of their real estate portfolios in order to get favorable terms on bank loans and insurance policies. And that's going to be coming down. So I guess that's the sixth case. So those are the cases. As you can tell, bad man, but I'm very skeptical of the legal legitimacy of the legal theories that are being introduced here against Donald Trump for the purposes of punishing a bad man. Oh, and let me just ask the last question. Who among us would think that any of these cases, other than the defamation case, would have been brought had he not declared running for the presidency? Who believes that any of those cases would have been brought? And if you're not sure, then you have to say, well, that's not justice. That's something else. That's truly what the word, which I don't like the use of the word, the weaponization of the legal system to achieve a political end. All right, that's about it for me.
You really, I think when we were corresponding with, I didn't even include the last two. So I feel like that, it's extra credit, or I got a
Thank
bonus
you.
here
Thank
with
you.
the last
I
two.
was hoping for class participation.
The let's there's different pieces to all of this.
Yeah.
If you were, let's start with the first one, the documents case.
Yeah.
If you were the prosecutor, given that fact pattern, what, if anything, would you have charged uh, the former president with?
Well, here's the thing. That case and others have potential crimes in the criminal gross negligence category. And notice none of the cases avail themselves of that. Normally, as you know, prosecutors they like to overcharge because it gets them press conferences, but they don't like cases to blow up in their faces. So they have mixed motives. They like the bigger charge, but they want to win. And what you have here is a very different strategy that I think is very dangerous, which is this, Rodger. And again, I don't hear anyone saying it. The indictments are the win. I don't care if we win in front of a jury. I don't care if it's overturned later. I got a different goal right now. My goal is to get this guy, get him, disrupt him, send him off balance, make it hard for him, bankrupt him, keep him out of the Oval Office. So what I would say is they all share this one thing in common. If any of those prosecutors came to me, I'd go, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You've got him dead to rights on gross negligence. The guy is the most negligent of all Americans, right? He's reckless. You have them on that. In the documents case, don't use the word espionage. It's wrong, and it's the wrong statute, and it's a dangerous statute. It's a statute that should have already been repealed. Now you've given it life. You've animated it. You've turned it into something huge when it's something that we were always saying, keep it buried, keep it buried. It looks like he obstructed justice. It's a little tricky because he did have a possessory interest, but the minute that he said, I don't have any more, and then documents got moved from sock drawer to wherever the hell he moved them, that is technically an obstruction of justice. Do I think you put a president in jail for that? No, but you could probably get a conviction. But again, a prosecutor under these facts is saying, I don't want a conviction. I got to stop the guy.
Because I mean, and again, I do read the New York Times. My wife does watch MSNBC at times. I mean, I'm certain, and yet and again, I want to sort of speak generally. I don't get that vibe from the special prosecutor himself, whatever the title is, of the special prosecutor. Now, it may be that but so I guess the question is, you read him in that way because I have kind of accepted the narrative of, well, he's an uber prosecutor, if you will, but he takes that, but he takes that oath very seriously, which in some ways, again, having worked at the Department of Justice, ideally we say politics shouldn't enter into it. And just focusing on him, you read him that way? The prosecutor himself?
Rodger, because, Rodger, you do have a lot more different experiences than I do. So I'm going to ask you, are you of the opinion that Jack Smith and the head of the Democratic National Committee are never on the phone? Are you of the opinion of the opinion that he has had no connection with affiliated Democrats at all? That he's only talked to prosecutors and con law professors? That that his Democratic bona fides have never been in there? Because you may be right. I don't know. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm simply saying, if I were him, I might consider, I'm a good guy. He might say, I'm a prosecutor. I'm a good guy. I've worked in international law. I worked at the ICC. I'm a serious person. I'm not a clown. Hey, and Rodger, your wife who's watching MSNBC, she's listening to Larry Tribe. Who's Thane Rosenbaum? Seriously. Larry Tribe is saying that we come here right now. I worry about this, and I'm literally, Roger, this is what I'm thinking. What the hell happened to Larry Tribe? That's what I'm thinking. What happened to him? Is he what is going on in his mind? Because did he not hear of Brandenburg versus Ohio? I have his horn book at home. He knows that case. So why is he so emphatic, so nutty in my mind about the trampling over the Constitution here, when in fact I think it's the other way. I think we're trampling it in order to get Trump. So I'm not impugning bad motives to him. I'm just saying I don't think the politics here and the sense of the danger that Donald Trump is associated with in the minds of a very significant, what I would call the coastal elites, the cosmopolitan elites, the Ivy League educated people who have a lot of influence, who see him as a menace to democracy. He is. I'm not disagreeing. He's a menace to democracy. I said he was a bad man. The question is, does that, if you went to an Ivy League school and you were on the law review and now you teach at law schools, does that mean that you can, in this case, look past that because you see a bigger problem down the road? That's what I think he's doing.
And so this is actually, let me ask it this way, really, which is, how much of this, if you will, the concerns you're articulating are about the case or cases, since it's plural.
Yeah.
That is, if we, in the parlance of the Department of Justice, right, doing justice in a particular case, how much of it is about, if you will, the current political state of the republic, and how much of that is about, say, post 2024, right? We're going to have an election. There will be a president, whoever that might be, and we're going to have to keep governing, or the government will have to keep operating. And I really do think those are sort of three. They may overlap, but different or discrete interests in a way. And I wonder, for you, in sort of articulating these concerns, how much does each particular interest sort of relate to or inform the concerns you're articulating?
Well, one concern that I have, I like to use the word overlapping, because they are overlapping. You have half the country that now believes that the piling on Trump with these cases, I'm not alone. I'm just alone in a certain category of a person. Law professors would never say what I would say, because life is too short, and why should you have no friends, right? So I just tend to say things that make me friendless. But I'm saying most people, would say, again, there is a danger to the republic, and there's a bigger goal ahead of us, and governing is part of it, right? Governing is part of it, and we want to preserve the Constitution. What I would say is that you've created the impression in the minds of half the country that you would do nothing. You would even override your own better judgment on how the law is normally applied in order to stop our guy. And when our guy gets into office again, he's going to clean up. And that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about that Donald Trump is going to win, that these cases have galvanized his base. He's going to win, and he's going to do the very thing that everybody was trying to stop him from doing. He might not have. Remember, there was a peaceful transfer of power. If you would have asked me 6 years ago, I would have said to you, you know what the problem with this guy is? He's not going to leave, no matter what the election is. He did. I was so thrilled. I couldn't believe it. He actually left the White House. So I'm just saying now, I'm afraid he'll double down. He'll say, he has been introducing words like weaponization and corrupt. Notice how much he uses the word corrupt, right? Unprecedented. Never before has this happened. And I'm worrying about governing. What will it look like later? Similarly, what will it look like when we have now opened up the possibilities for more espionage acts and more deprivations of locking up lawyers for giving legal advice? Really? When did law professors think that was a good idea? I don't like Rudy Giuliani. Do I think John Eastman is lying when he says, I believe that we won? I don't know. I know we have to prove his state of mind. He's giving legal advice and he believed, and let me just tell you this what they call the fake elector slate. One of the things I've been saying, I've been written about, I've been saying it on media. You know, I'm a law professor. I've been reading all my life stuff around, you know, the Constitution. In 11th grade, I didn't understand the Electoral College. I still don't understand the Electoral College. I don't understand it. I didn't know about the Electoral Count Act until I started talking about it for CBS radio, when it became an issue of what powers did Mike Pence have and what ambiguities were embedded in the Electoral Count Act. And it looked pretty ambiguous. It wasn't ambiguous, Roger, because I think Congress went and amended it in the last several years to toy with the electoral, because they know the language is a little weird. So that means that John Eastman might have been looking at something and saying, I think we got a wrinkle here. I think that there might be something there. Similarly, it wasn't until this summer that the Supreme Court ruled on the independent state legislature theory, which meant that at the time of the election, it would not have been unreasonable for any of Trump's legal advisors to say, the hell with these states that change their election rules without the state legislature's authorization. The hell with them. If it's any of those states are battleground states that change their elections and allowed for the counting of millions of absentee ballots that would have otherwise been defective under other ways of evaluating these. If we believe any of that was going on, let's just send it back to the legislature. Now, you're not hearing a lot of people say that. I just said it. Touro has it now. You guys have it. I'm saying it's not, I believe this should come up as part of their defense. Oh, now I know that there's oversight, but I didn't know there was oversight before this Supreme Court case. Was it Harper versus, what was it called? North Carolina? Moore, yeah. Harper. I didn't know. Yes. They just did it in June, for love of God. I didn't know. If I was Eastman's lawyer, I would go, when did they decide that? Because at the time my client was giving this kind of advice, he thought that the Constitution had been violated by letting courts and election officials change rules on time, place, and manner. And they had no right to do it. So the hell with these results, send it back to the legislature, let them decide. And by the way, one last thought. For all the people out there that like to say there were 60 lawsuits all dismissed because there was no evidence of fraud, I always say, no. That's not what any of the courts said. First of all, not one of the courts said that. They all said there's no evidence of widespread fraud. Widespread is a very good word, because that means, I've said this word, what? That means there was fraud, but not widespread fraud. So that means 30,000 people that showed up to the ellipse might have had a reason to have their grievances heard, assemble to redress grievances, that there was evidence of maybe fraud, but not widespread. By the way, Roger, I voted for Biden and I believe that he won, but I also believe there were problems with the election. I believe it. And I think that we're not allowed to talk about it, but there were problems, statistical anomalies, things that in another universe we would have taken more seriously. But with Trump is such a danger, everyone said, forget it. So let's just be honest about what the courts said. They didn't say no evidence of fraud, widespread. And the second thing that they said, and I love this one, many of the courts said the following. As a judge, they literally said, on top of the no evidence of widespread fraud, the relief you're requesting is too extraordinary. The word extraordinary relief, why is that important? Well, you know what the judges are really saying? Are you out of your mind? Do you think I am going to disqualify millions of votes of African Americans in a country that enslaved Africans and then subjected them to Jim Crow laws? And I'm going to disqualify votes in Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Atlanta? Are you crazy? I'm not doing that, and no one I know would do that.
And apologies for the interruption. but I'm here talking with Thane Rosenbaum about the various legal cases, criminal and civil, pending against former President Trump. And as we've been talking, I know inevitably, because we're talking about a number of cases, we've jumped around a little bit, and that is par for the course. One thing I'm interested in is how do you understand what was going on January 6th at the Capitol, and what Trump was doing during that day, and what was the was there illegal activity? What illegal activity was there? If so, was that, the former president, is Trump implicated in any of that in any way?
So, I think you believe, so do I, that Jack Smith's a smart guy, right? You and I both think he's a smart guy.
I do.
If he thought that the words "fight like hell" or the tweet "come to DC, it'll be wild," if he thought that met the Brandenburg Standard, and the incitement of imminent lawlessness, he would have brought an incitement case against Trump for inciting January 6th. He would have brought it. You know why? Because the Congress called it the January 6th case, and now they renamed it the overturning the election case. So it's like they pulled the bait and switch. And I keep going, whoa, that's a different name. It's a very different name. What would happen to the January 6th case? I think Jack Smith is a smart guy. And he went, it'll be wild is what a frat boy would say. It's not the same thing as saying, bring weapons and let's smash the Capitol, because that's kind of what, under Supreme Court precedent, you're going to need. You're going to need something that's very specific and imminent. Come to kick ass. Come to fight. Bring chains, knives, whatever you got, and definitely use the words "hang Mike Pence." Use those words. You can quote me. I'm Donald Trump. That's what would have had to happen. To say "fight like hell," punctuated, to me, this is where I lost all faith in the process. The New York Times, the MSNBC refuses to quote this line that he said at the Ellipse. Soon we will all walk over or march over to the Capitol peacefully and patriotically. He said peacefully and patriotically, and make our voices heard. They won't play it. And I think it's gross. And I think it's gross for anyone who is in our business who hasn't said, that's not okay. Because we all had law school exams, and Brandenburg is pretty straightforward. And fight like hell, taking that and using only fight like hell when fight like hell is also what we say when we're fighting cancer. Fight cancer. Fight like hell can mean anything. That's not the same thing. Smash the Capitol, go hunt down Mike Pence and hang him. Instead, they said, it'll be wild. Summon the crowd. I mean, seriously, summon the crowd. What I think happened is deplorables too. I don't think people in our world, and I mean that I'm blaming our world, coastal elites, highly educated, cosmopolitan, liberal in the meaning of the word open, have really taken a serious look of how much contempt we have for the red states. I believe it. And they know it. And that's their guy. And Trump tapped into it when he ran for president the first time. None of us believed he could possibly win. He understands this stuff. He understands that there are millions of people who feel the contempt and the derision and the not mattering that blue states and coastal elites feel towards poorer, less educated people. Listen to country music, who love the show Yellowstone. They know it. They know. And so I just think 30,000, no one wants to talk about 30,000 people that said, wait a minute, I got in my Ford 150 truck. I'm sorry, I'm showing all the stereotypes. I
just
got
gonna
in my
say,
I got in my Ford 150 truck, and I had country music blasting, and I even had a beer in my hand at the time. And I drove all the way to the closest polling station, and I took out my driver's license and I showed it, and I voted for Donald Trump. And I don't think the people who are of color in Detroit, Milwaukee, Atlanta, and Philadelphia did. And that's what it looks like to me. And that's what Newsmax and Fox are pointing out. And that's why I went to sleep thinking he won and woke up learning that there were a lot of votes that showed up late and that tens of millions of votes came in absentee. That's what I think happened on January 6th. The 1,000 people who got arrested, these are the same kind of people that get in fights after football games. They like that. There's no evidence that they acted in a coordinated fashion. You know why I know that? Because only a dozen of them got convicted of seditious conspiracy, fewer than a dozen. So they arrested 900. So I don't know what the percentage is. If you had a coordinated insurrection, you would have had 900 convictions for seditious conspiracy. Instead, the vast majority of people pled guilty to things like disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, attacking a policeman, disorderly conduct, the destruction of federal property, but not insurrection. So when they use the word too loosely, vandalizing the streets in the aftermath, and unfortunately they saw only African Americans. It would have been so much better if there were more white people in the crowd, but there weren't as many, or you couldn't see them. And so we are completely ignoring the effect that this is playing bad in red states. So if you look at what happened on January 6th, all of that happened on January 6th, but it doesn't dismiss the 30,000. If you talk to most blue state intellectuals, they would say it's 31,000. It's all the same, whether you smash the Capitol or not. If you showed up in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, you are an insurrectionist, you are a racist, you're an Islamophobe, you're a bigot, you are a fascist, you're all of that. And I'm sorry, Roger, I'm not prepared to say that. I'm not. I'm just not. I don't look at them and immediately say that. I said, maybe they are saying I drove in my pickup truck and I took out my driver's license, and that should be the same thing required of people in Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Atlanta. And I'm being told that those votes should not have counted, and these battleground states, Roger, were razor thin margins, right? Which is why when Trump says, he didn't say falsify 11,700 votes. I'm just saying a jury's going to have to say that he said falsify when he said, I need you to find me 11. If he thought he won and it was a razor thin margin, I can see jurors believing that. I can see someone saying, well, that's not the same thing as saying manufacture or falsify. And so I'm just saying that's what I think happened. But I don't think that if you really look at it honestly, it doesn't look worse to me than burning police precincts and police cars and pulling down federal statues. It doesn't to me, and I can see how someone in a red state go, why did my cousin who was he didn't break anything, he was just wandering around, why was he in lockup for 6 months and people that burned police cars were never arrested? Nobody wants to confront that problem.
We've gone for a while. And with the interruption, no, this is only
sorry,
because
it's a mouthful. Sorry.
No, well, it's a big subject, and hindsight's always 2020. It may have been that it was almost too ambitious of a podcast, at least for the time that we've taken. But let me ask this, and it's sort of I'll sort of pivot us back to the law side. And you're a pundit, you make predictions. Do you think any of these cases will actually go to trial? And what do you think will happen? Understanding that it's a crystal ball and no one has one and so on.
Pretrial motions are going to take forever. Everyone has a right to a defense, and they have a right to raise defenses in advance of trial, pre-trial. You have a lot, in my mind, as I said, utilizing creatively a lot of statutes that could be subject to motions to dismiss as a matter of law, right? This just simply, this is not that. There's a lot of that potential here. I shouldn't be in this courtroom. I should be in that courtroom. I have a right to, I'm a lawyer. I have the right to zealous advocacy, right? It's actually an ethical requirement of my profession. What happened to that, right? You're going to start hearing stuff like this. I don't see how you can pick a jury in America. I just don't, not in those cities. And I also think that even if they did go to trial, but I can't imagine before the election, because I do think in the end, if Donald Trump is defeated, I think the case will just disappear. And that's a real cynicism. I think they'll simply disappear. And I'm sorry to sound so cynical, but it would be like, well, now we're demonstrating what this was really about. This was really about creating an impasse roadblock to stop them from succeeding. And we were willing to do it. I think that these cases all of them are complicated. All of them are on their face, not on the nose, so to speak. They require rereading of statutes. And America's justice goes slow, always. I thought that what happened this week with Chesebro's attempt to invoke the speedy trial rule, either he or his lawyer are geniuses. That was the one genius move that's happened in the last year.
Just tell us,
I thought it was
not everyone will get the reference. Yeah.
I think it's a genius move. I thought they're saying is, you know what? Normally, you would think we would like to delay, but this is a sprawling, elaborate case you've filed. This is a complicated case. Are you really ready? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. I'm ready. Come on, bring it. You got 160 acts. They also know this is a RICO case. If I'm Chesebro's lawyer, again, I'm not that smart. Chesebro's lawyer said, she's never going to let this case be separated from the other 18. She'd be ridiculous. She would then be giving up all the evidence to the other 18 lawyers. They would be watching on television every piece of evidence that's going to be used against them and give them essentially a 6-month time to figure out what to say. More importantly, if I'm a juror in this speedy trial case in October, Roger, you know what I'm thinking? I thought RICO meant that you all guys acted together. We're the other 18. I thought this was that there were moving parts, but it's the same machinery. And this had to happen, and that had to happen, and this had to happen, and this had to happen. If he's not with the others, is separated, then I think this whole house of cards falls down. The way you've explained it to me is they don't need to know each other, but they all have to do what they're doing in order for this to have achieved the result that they wanted, essentially to overturn the election. I don't see how. I think a juror is going to go, shouldn't all those people be here? Aren't all those little pieces, that phone call, that tweet, that email message, that meeting that took place, aren't all of those things indispensable to understanding this crime? How are we understanding this crime if we're only just talking about this guy? So I just think it was a genius move. It complicates it. And now you can see what she did. She goes, okay, let's put them all in October. Good luck. Yeah, all of them, right? Not just separate. So I don't know. I just can't imagine in our nation getting through the procedural hurdles to finish this. And that's why I said, I don't want to be, impugning motives, but I think that the prosecutors to some extent thought the more elaborate and serious the indictment, the better, even if they don't go to trial, even if we don't win. It's still a victory, a huge victory. It paints him in the way we want to paint him. It tars him in the way we want him tarred. It might energize our base. It'll energize his base, but it might energize our base. It may bankrupt him. He may not be able to actually pay for what he needs to do to run a campaign. He won't be able to leave the courthouse. He's way more charismatic than Joe Biden is at this point. Again, now you're saying, well, Thane, that does sound political. I know, but all I can say is that I just think there's so many difficulties in these cases. These are very smart people. They must have known of these difficulties and decided to proceed. For instance, I'm often wrong. When the falsification of business case was filed, that indictment was unsealed, Rodger, all over the country on CBS, on Newsmax, I said I was wrong. I said you won't see the other cases. That's it.
Oh, you thought it would just be New York and nothing else?
Yeah, I said, it would be too ridiculous that, America wouldn't tolerate it. Forget the base. No one would tolerate what it would look like, the appearance, of all these cases, even 2 cases, 1. And I thought it's really a shame because the falsification of business record porn star case is really weak. And if I was Jack Smith, I'd be really mad because I would be saying, you now stop me from going because you decided to dance first. Who are you to dance first? You're just a prosecutor with a shitty porn star case. And I have espionage case and I have a obstruction of justice case. And you have a shitty misdemeanor case. And now you stopped me. So again, I was wrong. I'm often wrong. I said, well, Donald Trump caught a break. The weakest case went first. They won't see any more. Rodger, if I was a betting man, I would have lost all my money that all 4 would have been filed. I wouldn't have believed it.
Well, how could I not conclude there? Which is that, it's been wonderful talking with you. You will not be doing our pro football picks on the Law Review Podcast.
Terrible. The worst. The worst.
But boy, it was an interesting discussion, and it's all unfolding, and I mean that quite seriously. And so, it may be in 6 months or next summer when I say, welcome back again.
He was wrong again. This guy won't stop. He's just wrong.
If I enjoy hearing you say that, I'll never show it to your face. I thank you again so much. And I think that's today's podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodger. It's always a pleasure seeing your face and hearing your voice. Thank you.